As we walk across the park, we look over the river from Waterloo Place, named after our recent victory against Napoleon. We had been living in fear of French invasion of our town for some time prior to this. In 1820, the town was singularly free from the revolutionary spirit then abroad throughout the country. At the height of the Chartist movement, it was officially reported from the headquarters of the agitation that the cause is behind in Greenock in consequence of the want of speakers, and the workmen generally have too good wages to join. In settling down to the conditions of the new regime, the community as a whole showed no extraordinary stirrings of the imagination, nor were they roused to a much deeper sense of social ideals. It was essentially a workaday world for the industrial population. The public mind was engrossed with the ambition of getting on. Through the broadening channels of a world-embracing shipping riches came pouring into the laps of merchants, shipowners, shipbuilders, sugar refiners. In successive decades, the population increased by tens of thousands of the artisan and labouring classes. Relations between Greenock and Port Glasgow got particularly bad in 1820. The Port Glasgow militia brought prisoners to Greenock jail from Paisley, but things got out of hand and they killed innocent bystanders. The jail was situated just to our left on Bank Street. I really believe that people underestimate the power of local rivalries. Instead of the people of Greenock rising up in support of the Paisley weavers, I believe that it was more the fact that they were upset at the Port militia acting all high and mighty, much to the chagrin of the locals. In 1810 the jail, or Bride Bill, was built. It is situated behind the mid-parish church, in a fine open space enclosed with a wall, and is built something in the style of an old castle, having 2 towers in the front with battlements at the top. This is the only place occupied as a prison for criminals, and contains a debtor's apartment, besides a place where the criminals labour. Previous to its erection, the jail, or Black Hole, was in front of the town house, but the first durance vile which was used in Greenock was a thatched house at the bottom of Broad Close, where the jugs were hung in terrorem of offenders, and another set of jugs were hung for the same laudable purpose at the West Quay Head, in a house called the Inspector's Land. The keep, or as it was called Massimore, of the Mansion House, was afterwards used as a prison, and continued to be so until after the year 1765, when the town buildings were erected. The Renfrewshire Bank occupies a substantial house, built in 1811 on the line of Shaw Place. The time of its first establishment was in 1802, and it then occupied the low flat of the house in Hamilton Street, opposite Tanworth Close. Like the Greenock Bank, its business is very extensive, having various branch banks independent of its intercourse with all commercial districts. It was robbed in 1828. We are now on Shaw Place. John Martin, whose house is here, was a provost. He was educated at the Greenock Grammar School and the Greenock Academy, and he distinguished himself in every class that he attended. Mr. Martin, son of the distiller Donald, commenced his business career in the highly respectable house of John Rankin and Company, shipping agents in Greenock, and on the death of Mr. Rankin, he succeeded to the business of that firm. The Rankins ran plantations in Barbados and married into the McClartys, another local West Indian merchant family. Their daughters all married well, to Charles Cunningham Scott, the shipbuilder, Hinton Spalding, doctor and plantation owner, William Shand of Jamaica, Henry Dunlop, one-time Provost of Glasgow, and William Kent, who served in the Navy and was involved in the case against William Bligh in Australia. Martin is married to a daughter of Robert McPhee, so I guess we are related through marriage. He also became a ship owner in conjunction with his friend Mr. Hoyle, now of Kames Castle in Bute. They started a business of sugar refining under the firm of Hoyle, Martin and Company, and this firm, which has had a career of such prosperity, now owns 2 sugar houses here and 1 in Glasgow. Mr. Martin's mother, Elizabeth Scott, inherited land in Jamaica, as well as 140 slaves. Shaw Place is in a prime position in the town, and from here south to the Mount, the more successful merchants built their houses, away from the lower classes below. James Watt was also deeply interested in astronomy, and it is said that at night he often retired to a quiet retreat among the elms and beeches which then covered Regent Street and Shaw Place, to lie on his back watching the movements of the stars. Walking up to Regent Street from Trafalgar Street, we can see more of the fine houses built on this hill. William McPhee, the sugarman, has his house here, as well as old John Campbell, Controller of Customs, my old boss. His daughter Jean married Robert Sinclair Jr., the nephew of Robert, the engineer of Scott, Sinclair and Company shipbuilders. His father runs a West India company in London. John Heriot, the auctioneer, lives at number 13 on the left. His wife Isabella is up to receive money for her cousin's slaves in Grenada. The road continues down a tree-lined avenue to the Dillingburn, where the new Shaw's Water scheme has brought water power to the new industries on Baker Street. There are mills, refineries and engine works, all using the natural power of water to propel the wheels, designed by Robert Thom, the architect of our future prosperity. All the investors in the Shaw's Water scheme are the leading landowners and merchants of the time. It is often thought that the purpose of the scheme is to bring clear drinking water to the town, but in fact it is purely a business investment, hoping to build a cheap source of power for the mills of the town, in order to bring further investment and employment to the town to compete with our neighbours Paisley and Glasgow. To the south, sitting on the hill or mount, are more fine houses, belonging to shipowners and merchants. Market gardens and orchards are situated on the rise. Where Regent Street now stands was also covered with wood until 1809, when this beautiful ornament to the town also disappeared. The peculiar advantages which the inhabitants of the policy enjoy in being exempted from town taxes has made this place, independent of its fine situation, much sought after. The name of this wood was popularly known as Lovey's Wood, and here many a happy schoolboy hour was spent, in the intervals between studying Horace or some teasing mathematical problem. Yet here, amidst all the noisy glee of as rich a scene as can well be remembered, to use Gray's beautiful lines, alas, regardless of their doom, the little urchins play. No dread have they of ills to come, no care beyond a day. Towards down the hill, we pass Ann Street and Sir Michael Street. These streets were the locations of several schools in town. The trade school was opened in May 1829 at an original cost of £1,100. While it was greatly through the exertions of the Greenock Seamen's Friendly Society that this, called also the Sailors' School, was established, the actual founder was Mr. Alan Kerr. On the word of his municipal colleagues, Mr. Kerr was so deeply anxious to diffuse education among all ranks and to add to the general respectability of the town by increasing the number of seminaries for instruction, that at his own expense he erected a school for affording good education at a low rate to the children of operative tradesmen and others. It was left in charge of the Church of Scotland, particularly of the session of the mid-parish. Alan Kerr was a prosperous shipowner and merchant. He ever had the cause of seamen at heart, and it was largely owing to Mr. Kerr's efforts that the Seamen's Friends Society was instituted at a meeting held in January 1820. Mr. Kerr died suddenly in Glasgow on the 17th of May 1829, and in Williamson's history he is referred to as one who had filled with honour and distinction the office of magistrate, an enlightened and liberal educationist, a partner in numerous commercial concerns, and one who had always at heart the promotion of the best interest of the community and seamen in particular. He is buried in Inverkip Street graveyard. Alan Kerr was on the jury of the Paisley Radicals in 1820. Here also is the old relief church of William Auld. 10 men had occasion to disagree with the way in which the seats were being let in the Midkirk, and they went out to form a new congregation. They first met in a vacant circus at the foot of Sugarhouse Lane. A more suitable place was shortly found not far from the present church, and a decision was made to join the Relief denomination, at the time not a very popular body. The Advertiser thus referred to a congregation and church in 1807. We are happy to observe that the Relief Meeting House is intended to be erected in this populous place. May no root of bitterness spring up among the sects, for if the people would regularly attend public worship on the Lord's Day, it would take about double the churches to contain them. Reverend William Auld of the Relief Church, Penpunt, was called in 1808 and was minister until his death in 1849. Under his pastorate, the congregation rapidly increased, and he enjoyed great popularity throughout the town. His son is a doctor in the town now. Moving on to Sir Michael Street. This was a busy street with several churches and schools, as well as many businesses and private houses. Andrew Lang, a bookseller and a stationer who took over the business of Daniel Weir, lives at 1 Sir Michael Street. He had previously worked in Inverness and London, and was a partner in the business of Mackenzie and Walker, the millers at Baker's Brae. Though somewhat harsh in his manner, he was kindly and communicative. Also on Ann Street is the Female School of Industry, run by Mrs. William Johnson. It moved from near the Masons' Hall to Sir Michael Street in 1814 and held over 900 pupils. The Advertiser reported, "The school was opened in March last, chiefly for educating the girls who have finished their course of reading, writing and religious instruction in the charity school, in the different branches which qualify for domestic service. A hope was entertained by the founders that training these young women in this manner, they would be enabled to provide for themselves in any situation of life, and the number of well-principled servants would be greatly increased." The committee entrusted with the care of conducting this important and interesting experiment feel themselves warranted to say that it has succeeded beyond their expectations, and promises to gratify in due time the best wishes of the numerous and respectable subscribers. 32 girls are now effectively instructed in sewing, spinning, knitting, darning, washing and smoothing linens, with the other duties of housemaid, and there is reasonable prospect of still greater number being taught these various and useful branches at little expense. The committee earnestly solicit the ladies who have, through their liberality, laid the foundation, and all the other ladies who have the good heart of their own families and that of numerous classes of their own sex, to be present at the meeting on Monday, and to aid in completing this edifice, sacred to female piety and virtue, industry and happiness. The Greenock Mechanics Library was instituted in 1830 and now is located in a building at the foot of Sir Michael Street. The Mechanics Institution may be justly entitled a School of Arts, having for its aim the mental as well as the mechanical improvement of the class to which it belongs. Much praise is certainly due to the individuals whose exertions have been the means of bringing it to its present prominent position. The building contains a splendid suite of rooms for the accommodation of the institution. The lecturing hall, a well-lighted and spacious room, is 60 feet long and 36 feet wide, and has sittings for upwards of 600 individuals. Besides the library room, another is in the course of finishing to be used as a public reading room, and will be supplied with newspapers and other suitable periodicals. Another large apartment is intended to be fitted up with necessary apparatus as a classroom for instruction in mathematics, naval architecture, and other branches of knowledge connected with the arts and manufactures of Greenock. As we walk down, we join Roxburgh Street. The Holmescroft Brewery is on our left, run by David Buchanan, and the Roxburgh Sugar House is on our right. Jelly, whose shop was robbed by Moses MacDonald, owned this land. This was a shocking story. Poor MacDonald was executed for a crime he didn't commit because Jelly and his wife had incredulously made up the story. They in fact had robbed their own shop, and somehow Moses MacDonald was blamed and killed for it. The Jellies were banished from the town as a result. Roxburgh Sugar House was built last year by Mr. Hugh Hutton. The few on which the refinery was erected originally belonged to, as we said, Mr. James Jelly, who later disposed of it to Messrs. George and John Ferguson, and they in turn sold it in 1832 to Messrs. Robert Angus, Archibald Patten, and George Ochterson, names not unfamiliar in Greenock, with West Indian connections. The refinery is named reputedly after the West Indian estate of the Shaw Stewarts on Tobago, the largest on the island. Archibald Stewart, the son of Sir Michael, was a friend of Boswell and had been in business with that fearsome enemy of Britain, John Paul Jones, who terrorised the coast of Britain on behalf of the new American nation. Archibald was killed on the island by a party of raiding Americans in 1779. Further over to the west is Mount Pleasant and the farms of Finnart, as well as the road to Inverkip. My friend George Williamson, the Procurator Fiscal, lives at Orangefield. He has written many historical articles and the life of James Watt. He was also a member of the Watt Club in 1813, which eventually became the Philosophical Society. We were in the volunteers together. We are passing, with some trepidation, the new burial ground on Duncan Street. It is an extension of the Inverkip Street burial ground, a few granted from Sir Michael in 1810. The recent outbreak of cholera has led to large amounts of burials placed in pits. The stench of putrefaction in this area is offensive in the extreme. My family are buried in the Inverkip Street ground, but I am afraid to go there, as there has been much abuse of the laws of nature and dignity. The joiners of the town have been responsible for grave digging, and unfortunately, due to the increase in population, they have been burying, with the collusion of the sextant, people in shallow graves, in the graves of other families, and the situation has become completely injurious to health and well-being. One can see bits of corpse on the surface of the ground in shallow pools of stagnant water. As you walk along, you can see where the lamp holders are in the wall, to help keep watch against the body snatchers. This has become a phenomenon recently. In the graveyard you can see morgue-safes too, metal guards placed over the graves to prevent intrusion. The infamous case of Burke and Hare, the body snatchers of Edinburgh, was brought to court just 5 years ago, and the effect has been an extra vigilance, with societies formed to guard over our graveyards night and day. On our left is the Greenock Infirmary. Prior to its opening in 1809, there was a dispensary for the sick and poor, initially in Manse Lane in 1801, later in Cathcart Street. It was staffed by 4 medical attendants and an apothecary. Their duties included visiting the sick, poor unable to attend, in their homes. As a direct result of illness and death caused by a contagious fever caught from Russian sailors in 1806, an infirmary was proposed and the old house in Inverkip Street was opened on the 2nd of May 1809. The first nurse employed was a Margaret McCallum. The infirmary is a charity hospital established by a group of leading citizens and has recently been extended. We are now looking towards East Shaw Street and beyond to Tobago Street, Market Street and the Long Vinnell. These are foul places in general. Open sewers on the streets give it a fetid atmosphere and open to the scourge of cholera. The lack of drainage is a constant issue. Dr. Laurie, who married one of the McPhee girls, wrote a report into the sanitary conditions in Greenock. Greenock is situated on a declivity, having a northern exposure. The chief part of the town extends along the riverside from east to west for upwards of 2 miles. It is very irregularly built, each person being allowed to build how and where he pleases, with little regard to any specified plan. This is much to be regretted, as from the situation it might have been made one of the finest looking towns in the kingdom. The view from the higher parts of the town being very extensive and varied, and commanding scenery seldom to be met within the vicinity of so large a community. The more wealthy part of the inhabitants live towards the west part of the town, and the houses are of comparatively recent date. Towards the east or old part of the town, the amount of population crowded into a small space can hardly be credited. The rapid increase of the population has so far overstepped the means of accommodation that not the meanest outhouse remains without its tenants. In considering the sanitary conditions of a populous town like this, the state and nature of the dwellings of the poor ought to form a particular object of inquiry. Across the street here is the Roman Catholic Church of St. Mary's, built by the Reverend John Gordon. The land provided for this graveyard on Inverkip Street was given by Shaw Stewart in 1786, as it was far enough away from the centre of the town. It took the place of that at the West Kirk. This is the place where my mother and father are buried. Their stone reads, "Here are deposited the remains of John Galt, formerly shipmaster and afterwards merchant in Greenock. He died on the 6th of August 1817, in the 67th year of his age, having uniformly enjoyed the esteem of all who knew him. Also Jean Thompson, his spouse, who died on the 18th of July 1826, in the 80th year of her age." This stone is erected in affectionate remembrance by Agnes Galt, widow of Robert Andrew McPhee, late merchant in Greenock, who died on the 28th of October 1811, esteemed by those who knew him best. Agnes married Robert Andrew McPhee in Greenock in 1806. Robert was a grocer and merchant in Greenock, son of Robert McPhee, the sugar refiner, and his wife Mary Andrew. He died in 1811 and is buried here. I stated before about the state of this graveyard. It has gotten worse and worse over the years. The first visit of cholera to Greenock took place last year in 1832. In spite of all preventive measures, the epidemic raged with terrible virulence and carried off 2,000 persons, in addition to the ordinary death rate. At the same time, a pestilence of smallpox was stalking through the country, taking a dreadful toll of lives. Appearing about the end of February, almost concurrently with the first case of cholera, had within 3 months seized 320 victims in a population of 27,571, and the deaths were 171. The disease was stayed for a time, but broke out afresh, with such dire effect that by the end of October there had been 839 cases and 431 deaths. From that date, the epidemic gradually disappeared. As we travel across West Shaw Street, we see the sugar house of Angus and Co., the reservoir to the right, and the Westburn running down to the shore. The brewery is there. Robert Angus and his brothers are in partnership with Mr. Kaiser and Mr. Blanken, German refiners. Robert Angus has built the large mansion at Seafield. The refinery is now in the hands of Mr. Walker. Robert was later described by John Stewart as a fine specimen of the gentleman merchant, refined in life and thought, and of unimpeachable integrity. And although sometimes irritable, having met with heavy reverses and bereavements in his long life, yet the generally quiet tone of his conduct, even the style of his anger when he had cause to find fault with me, never was other than that of a gentleman. On Coblain Street is Coblain House, belonging to the Anderson family, merchants who made their money in America. Living at 12 Coblain Street was Lieutenant Samuel H. Hermans, Her Majesty's agent for immigration. He was appointed as agent for immigrants at Greenock at the beginning of April 1833, and he received the following instructions from the Colonial Office. You will correspond with any magistrates, clergymen, or parish officers who may address you, and you will, if desired, receive remittances of money from them for the purpose of paying the passage of immigrants, recommended by them to your care. You will give gratuitous information as to the sailing of ships, means of accommodation on board for immigrants, and other particulars which may be of importance in facilitating their emigration. You will see that all engagements entered into with passengers be duly performed, and in the case of vessels proceeding to the British colonies, you will take care that the provisions of the Passengers Act be complied with. And although not possessed of any power of enforcing legal penalties for improper conduct, You will endeavour to check any objectionable practice by a remonstrance with the shipmasters or owners concerned, and by reporting bad cases to this department, in order that any government allowance for passengers may subsequently be refused to those parties who may have sent to sea ships in an unseaworthy state. After you shall have become better acquainted with the town of Greenock, you will probably be able to direct immigrants to suitable lodging-houses, and that you will make a quarterly return to this department of the number of immigrants who may embark from Greenock. We will now cross the Westbourne and go up to Nelson Street, then right towards George Square. As we climb up, we see Mr. Robert Bain's house on the left. His father, also Robert, was involved in the American trade in the middle of the last century, along with old Mr. Miller, my old boss. His sons, Walter, Robert and Archibald, all made their fortune in the fishing trade, expanding to Newfoundland. Robert became an agent for a bank. We are in the barony of Finnart, stretching from the Westbourne towards Gourock. Here it is that the merchants of Greenock have started to build their large mansions from their profits of empire trade. Hyde has built Finnart House, George Robertson built the mansion at Argown Square, and his son has built another at Bagatelle. Seafield, at the shore, is now the place to be, with houses springing up as we speak. We are now at the top of East Shaw Street. The West End, as it is called, is the area where the town will expand. It is planned to have an area much like the new town of Edinburgh, marked off in tree-lined wide avenues. The feuds are already being marked out. Greenock is growing so fast it is hard to keep up. A reminiscence of the period has reference to an old Candlemas custom, according to which the pupils brought money gifts to the teacher, the amounts from 6pence to half a crown. It was the occasion of a remarkable half-holiday, the children marching into the country, digging a grave, and going through the form of burying their king and queen. An old boy has thus described the event. Having reached Brackleston Toll Bar at the Inverkip Road, we diverged up the cart track leading into a quarry, and passed up over the hills among whins, immediately to the south of the elegant mansion of Caddle Hill, residence of Mr. Thompson the banker, and there we performed the ceremony of digging the grave and burying our king and queen. Across from us is the house of John Gray, who was born in 1787. His firm, Gray and Buchanan, had the extensive sugar stores forming the northwest corner of Argyle Street and West Blackall Street. It may be remembered that the hogsheads and other sugar packages were hoisted into the lofts by means of horse haulage, and in order to reach the higher portions of the warehouse, it was necessary for the horses to entirely cross the street. This system of hoistage was common in other parts of the town, but latterly became intolerable in busy thoroughfares, such as West Blackall Street. The obnoxious practice has been superseded by the adoption of excellent hydraulic hoists, now in almost universal use. According to one source, Mr. Gray has recently purchased the Garth estate in Jamaica. We move along to George Square, once representing the outer edges of the town. It was here that the Andersons, Hamlins and Walkers built their houses, on the ground that once was the site for a windmill. Thomas Hamlin was a ship's captain and ship owner, sailing all over the world. His ships were renowned as temperance ships. The Hamlins were deeply religious and took a prominent part in the civic life of Greenock. Thomas was on the committee for the infirmary and harbour trust, and was the treasurer of the London Missionary Society in Greenock and president of the Greenock Shipowners. He had purchased 2 feuds in George Square and would give one of them over for the building of the Congregational Church. The Walker family came to Greenock in the late 18th century and worked as bakers. In 1831, William opened the grain mills on the Shaw's Waterfalls, and his father had a bakery behind it. They then bought Angus's sugar house, which we have just passed. Gabriel Wood Sr. died at George Square on the 23rd of October 1823, aged 86. His son made a fortune and has left money to build the Mariners' Asylum under the auspices of his daughter. The Andersons, also living in George Square, were a very notable family in the west of Scotland. Andrew Anderson was one of the most successful and influential men in Greenock. He had built his house in George Square on the north side of the square. He was in partnership with Archibald Campbell of Finlayson, who had made a vast fortune in the West Indies. Anderson had also been connected with the West Indies, owning the Hermitage plantation. His son is the beneficiary of the Slave Compensation Board to the sum of almost £2,000.